Global trade often appears borderless. Ships move cargo across vast oceans. Capital flows between continents in seconds. Financial markets open in Tokyo, close in New York, and begin again in London before most people even wake up. On the surface, the system feels smooth and continuous. But the reality is very different. When tensions rise, certain locations suddenly become extremely powerful. These are not just points on a map. They are pressure points for supply, capital, and geopolitical influence. Almost 1/5 of the world's oil travels through a narrow waterway, barely 21 miles wide. A single canal in Egypt handles more than 10% of global trade. In 2021, when a container ship became stuck in the Suez Canal, the blockage lasted only 6 days, but it halted nearly $10 billion in global commerce every day. Modern finance may run on digital systems, satellites, and data networks, but the movement of real goods still depends on narrow corridors of land and sea. And when those corridors tighten, money tightens with them. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history intersect. Because in global economics, things are rarely as simple as they appear. This is the story of how strategic choke points have shaped global finance for centuries, not only through wars and empires, but through inflation, currency dominance, sovereign debt, and financial crises. Whenever geography narrows, leverage concentrates. And concentrated leverage, especially under pressure, becomes power. Globalization creates the illusion that everything is evenly connected. In reality, trade moves through specific arteries. And, like arteries in a body, those pathways can be blocked. This pattern is ancient. In the 5th century BCE, the narrow strait, known as the Hellespont, linking the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea, became a strategic obsession for the Persian Empire. During his invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, Xerxes famously built pontoon bridges across the strait to move his army. Control of that waterway meant control over grain shipments coming from the Black Sea region. Grain that Athens relied on for survival. This was not only military strategy, it was economic necessity. Athens depended heavily on imported grain. Interrupt that flow, and food prices surge. When food prices surge, political stability quickly begins to erode. Geography created leverage. Leverage triggered conflict. And conflict reshaped power. Now fast forward 2,000 years. In 1869, the Suez Canal opened through a joint French and Egyptian initiative. For the first time, ships could travel directly between Europe and Asia without sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. A journey that once took months suddenly became weeks shorter. Transportation costs dropped and trade expanded rapidly. But canals do more than shorten routes. They concentrate power. The British Empire immediately recognized the canal's strategic value. India was the crown jewel of the empire, and the Suez Canal provided the fastest connection between Britain and its most valuable colony. In 1875, Egypt's ruler Ismail Pasha faced severe financial trouble after borrowing heavily for modernization projects. Britain seized the opportunity and purchased a controlling share in the Suez Canal Company. This was not generosity. It was strategic calculation. Control of the canal ensured British dominance over a vital trade artery and reinforced London's status as the center of global finance. When trade and capital flow through your shipping routes, Your currency gains influence. Your banks expand. Your insurers dominate. The power of the British pound was not abstract. It was tied directly to maritime trade. By the late 19th century, London had become the financial clearinghouse of the world. Trade bills were settled in sterling. Insurance contracts were priced in sterling. Governments issued sovereign debt in sterling. But history rarely stands still. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, challenging British and French control. Britain, France, and Israel launched a military intervention to reclaim it. The United States, worried about financial instability and possible Soviet escalation, pressured Britain to withdraw. The crisis revealed something deeper than a diplomatic disagreement. Britain was no longer the world's dominant financial power. Its foreign reserves were limited. The pound came under pressure, and the United States refused to guarantee unconditional support. Within weeks, Britain was forced to retreat. The Suez Crisis became a symbolic turning point in the decline of the British Empire. Geography shifted, power shifted, and finance followed. As British influence over the canal faded, the rise of the US dollar accelerated. But canals are only one type of strategic choke point. Energy routes are another. The Strait of Hormuz lies between Iran and Oman, linking the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. Nearly 20% of global oil consumption moves through this narrow passage every day. That statistic represents far more than trade volume. It represents vulnerability. In 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the United States and several Western nations. Oil prices quadrupled within months. Energy-dependent economies experienced inflation spikes, while economic growth slowed. The result was stagflation, high inflation combined with high unemployment. The shock shattered the economic assumptions of the post-war world. This crisis did not begin with excessive money printing. It began with restricted supply in a geographically constrained region. When energy supply tightens at a choke point, prices surge. Energy costs then ripple through transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and heating. Inflation spreads across the entire economy. Central banks react. Interest rates rise. Debt servicing becomes more expensive. Government budgets strain. Currency values shift. Later, in the 1970s, the Iranian Revolution triggered another oil shock. Production fell and prices surged again, reigniting inflation in the United States and Europe. In response, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker dramatically raised interest rates between 1979 and 1980. At its peak, the federal funds rate climbed above 19%. The policy triggered a severe recession, but ultimately succeeded in bringing inflation under control. This is the typical chain reaction. Disruption at a choke point. Commodity price spikes. Inflation. Monetary tightening and financial stress. Sometimes inflation doesn't begin in the printing press. It begins in a narrow passage of water. And the pattern continues today. The Strait of Malacca, between Malaysia and Indonesia, carries roughly a quarter of global trade and most of the energy imports for China, Japan, and South Korea. If this passage were blocked, Asia's largest industrial economies would immediately face severe energy shortages. Shipping costs would rise sharply, insurance premiums would surge, markets would reprice risk within hours. Global finance responds rapidly to physical constraints. Another critical vulnerability lies in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan produces more than 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips through companies like TSMC. These chips power smartphones, cloud computing infrastructure, artificial intelligence systems, military hardware, and financial networks. During the pandemic in 2001 and 2002, supply chain disruptions created semiconductor shortages that slowed automobile production and electronics manufacturing worldwide. Prices increased. Production schedules slipped. Now imagine a geopolitical conflict that blocks Taiwan's semiconductor exports. The consequences would extend far beyond the technology sector. The digital backbone of the global financial system would feel the shock. Markets may be digital, but trade remains physical. The two cannot be separated. Even climate conditions can create choke points. During 2023 and 2024, severe drought lowered water levels in the Panama Canal, forcing authorities to limit the number of ships passing through each day. Shipping delays increased, freight costs rose, global supply chains adjusted. A canal built in 1914, once considered a triumph of engineering and American power, suddenly became vulnerable to rainfall patterns. Globalization is not frictionless. It operates under conditions. What connects all of these examples is compression. When global trade funnels through narrow corridors, leverage emerges. That leverage directly influences financial markets. Insurance costs rise when routes become dangerous. Commodity prices adjust to risk. Bond yields shift when inflation expectations increase. Currencies move when trade balances change. Financial markets are deeply connected to geography, and the more integrated the global economy becomes, the more important these choke points become. Integration creates dependency. Dependency creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates pricing power, and pricing power influences inflation, monetary policy, and capital flows. The 2021 blockage of the Suez Canal by the container ship Ever Given offered a modern reminder of this reality. One vessel halted traffic for 6 days. Hundreds of ships waited. Supply chains stalled. Markets reacted. 6 days. Now imagine a disruption lasting weeks or months. Global finance may appear abstract, but it ultimately depends on the physical world. And when those narrow corridors tighten, money moves with them.